Hello, and welcome to another segment of Fine Arts Features, the program that highlights members of the faculty and staff of the College of Fine Arts here at Wichita State University. Today, we have a conversation with Dean Roush, Professor of Musicology and Area Director of Musicology and Composition. Dr. Roush received his BFA in Ohio University, his Master of Music at Bowling Green State University, and a DMA from Ohio State University. He is a former National Science Foundation Research Associate in Computer Music and has published numerous research articles, compositions, and arrangements. His works for solo harp have been performed throughout the United States, Europe, and the Middle East, and they have been recorded on the Orion label. A compact disc of his composition for flute and organ, The Dove Descending, has been released on the Summit Records label. Dean is an active member of the College Music Society, Society for Music Theory, and Society of Composers. In 1995, he received individual artist fellowships in music composition from the Kansas Arts Commission. He has also served as composer in residence at the 1999 NOW New Music Festival at Capital University, and he is the winner of the 2002 William D. Ravelli Memorial Band Composition Contest for his work, Illuminations. I give you Dean Roush. Hello, and welcome to another session of Fine Arts Features. Today, we are focusing on Dean Roush, who is a professor of musicology and is the area director of musicology and composition in the School of Music at Wichita State University. Dean received his schooling, for the most part, in Ohio. He has his BFA from Ohio University, a Master of Music from Bowling Green State University, and his doctorate from Ohio State University. I'm assuming that was the Ohio State at the time, Dean?
It still is, I believe.
He is a former National Science Foundation Research Associate in Computer Music. And also you used to teach at Bowling Green, I believe it is. So welcome, Dean, and I look forward to this conversation. In a nutshell, tell us the life story of Dean Roush. Who is he, what is he, and why is he?
Well, my family had moved to Ohio when I was 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you about my most formative event professionally. When I was 9 years old, from the ages of 9 to 11, I was performing with the it's defunct now, but it was eventually best known as the American Boy Choir. And they were based in Princeton, New Jersey, and in other words, New York City area, where we spent a lot of time and performed a lot. In the course of that, we had opportunity to sing the Benjamin Britten Ceremony of Carols, and that's a work for treble voices and harp.
Mm-hmm.
And we went all up and down the East Coast doing that, and it planted a seed that maybe I could learn to play the harp someday if the opportunity ever arose. And eventually in college, it did. Somewhat the same for organ, and it allowed me to have a side hustle of church music. I was director of choirs and organist at one of the downtown churches for about 25 years plus. I retired from that a few years ago. Mm-hmm. But in the middle of that stint that I spent away from home, so not all of my schooling was in Ohio, mind you.
Okay.
We had the opportunity to participate in the first performance at Lincoln Center, and the First
mean
lady
the
was
inaugural
the inaugural
concert
performance.
of the
Exactly.
newly opened, in 1966, was it?
2, I'm
1963.
sorry, it was 62.
1962. Okay.
And I was 10. And I was, okay, so we did, under Leonard Bernstein, we did the first movement of the Mahler Symphony of 1,000, Symphony 8.
Yeah.
And where they had the Juilliard chorus, and they
Wonderful
had, and I was
symphony.
the smallest person on the stage, and quite possibly the youngest as well. And
Wow.
I counted the number of people on stage, and it wasn't 1,000, but it was over 500, I must say.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot of cuss words from Bernstein during the rehearsals. And there was also a piece by Aaron Copland, and it was a serial piece and rather dissonant. And he was being referred to as the Dean of American Composers. And that appealed to me, of course, because my name is Dean.
Yeah.
And, but I was really surprised that how hostile the players of the New York Philharmonic were to this modern music. So for what it's worth, it did plant a seed that I might like to be a composer as well as an organist or a harpist. And so I've managed to maintain all these things at some level of proficiency. And I've been subject to a lot of what I call academic jujitsu, where your strengths are held against you.
Well, wait a minute. What do you mean by that? Well, first of all, let me explain to people, you are probably as much of a Renaissance man as anybody in the School of Music. I mean, you play harp, you play piano, you play organ, you compose, you are, anytime we have some production or whatever that needs somebody to do something, the first person they call on is Dean. So with that background, explain the academic jujitsu.
Well, if I didn't play the harp, I wouldn't be asked to play in the orchestra.
Oh,
But my point is, though, that the seeds for all those Renaissance things were planted at a very young age.
Yeah. So at the age of 9, you decided that this was the direction you wanted to go. Tell me about from 9 until 18.
Well, they actually, it wasn't for my voice that they wanted me. It was the fact that I could I could sing the right pitches in the middle part.
Okay. Now you don't have perfect pitch, do you?
No, I do not.
Oh, okay.
But I have real good pitch.
Is that an official term, real good?
Pretty good pitch. I could always hear the right thing I was supposed to do, but they never gave me a solo.
Yeah. Actually, from what I understand, and I'm not really a musician, I'm just a singer. So,
right.
But from what I understand, perfect pitch is as much a curse as it is a gift. Because
I would agree.
I had a colleague who was a singer who had perfect pitch, and she said it absolutely drove her crazy because more times than not, she would be performing with a piano that wasn't quite at pitch or, quite just a little bit above or a little bit below, and she was always having to compensate. And
things change also when you age. Things end up about a half step off. I forget which direction.
Yeah.
So anyway, so in high school, or whatever school, middle school, high school, I pursued some of those things. I even learned to play the clarinet and was in the band for a while, but mostly choral. I remember very clearly looking around myself in high school thinking, even though I wanted to be a teacher, I was not interested in teaching or maintaining discipline among these kind of hooligans, right? I'm not a large person, and I'm a rather reserved person, and I think that's the moment that it occurred to me that college teaching would be a better fit for me.
High school marching band was not in your
Not, well, I probably would have gone choral.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, for me, even though I did go as an undergraduate in music, um, I didn't want to major in music to begin with because I had never had a choral background per se, which is another story. But
Mhm.
and at that time, my definition of purgatory was, and it still might be, being a junior high or high school band director. Is that a fair statement to make
That
in
is a
your
fair
case?
statement, and I did have a good one, and he was, I had a lot of respect for him,
Yeah,
and I even participated in marching band for 1 year.
yeah, yeah. So you went to Ohio University with the idea of majoring in music, but not to teach at a level below university. Is that right?
Right. So I started just on a theory composition track,
Yeah.
the whole just from the get-go, and much to my father's chagrin. And I will admit there were a few times that I wished I might have wished I had a music ed degree.
Yeah.
Uh, just in the years that between the doctorate and the tenure track position,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But I
Yeah.
managed
So,
mostly through the National Science. The thing you mentioned about National Science Foundation,
yeah. Yeah.
was a good job for me.
So let me ask you this. And again, within the backdrop of the introduction, by the way, that we have attached to not just this fine arts features, but all of the fine arts features, the composition that we use in that introduction is a composition of yours. It is what the official title is what? Inauguration fanfare?
Inaugural fanfare
Inaugural fanfare
with alma mater.
with alma mater. That's the official title. Well,
It's sort of like still life with bowl of pears or something. Inaugural
okay.
fanfare with alma mater.
So let me ask you this. Was your motivation to major in theory composition in order to teach theory and composition at the university level, or was it the motivation to be a composer? Which was the stronger of the two?
Well, both. And nowadays people specialize more in one or the other. But
Yeah.
at the time, and I was one of the last to do
Yeah.
this, but at the time we were encouraged to be proficient at both.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, even the positions now are very specialized.
Yeah.
Either or.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm happy that I have done what I have done.
So, but your motivation from the get-go was to go through the system and get your terminal degree with the object of being a university professor.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
From the beginning.
Okay.
Uh,
Why Bowling Green for your master's?
Well, that is an interesting question. I was going to take a gap year.
Yeah.
And then somebody had flaked out on the GTA position up there, and they called my teacher, and the rest is history.
Oh, okay.
Turns out I found some wonderful teachers up there, and including the harp teacher, who was also a musicologist, who became a mentor and tutored me in the European technique of harp.
Mm-hmm.
With good tone.
Well, let me ask you this. What is the difference between, I'm assuming, an American technique and a European technique?
The American technique has a method, and that's all I'm comfortable saying.
Oh, okay. well, there is not a method to your madness in the European technique?
It's less of a method, it's less restrictive.
Okay. Okay. So So I have to say, watching and listening to harpist has fascinated me. It looks so complex. I know that the different strings have different colors and so forth, uh, but how do you learn? I mean, it's not like learning to play a guitar. It's not like learning to play a piano, but somewhere in between. How do you?
Well, I,
What's the basic technique for figuring out how you play a harp?
I in high school, I played guitar. I was a member of a Peter, Paul, and Mary, what we would now call a cover band.
Yeah.
And but I would also do solo work, and I would get up and do the whole 20-minute spiel of Alice's Restaurant and stuff like that. When I learned the harp, I gave up the guitar, so it satisfied my need for plucking strings, I guess.
Ah,
But the
okay.
hardest thing about harp is that you make the accidentals with your feet, and
Okay.
you have to be very. It's very difficult to sight read harp music for that reason. And if the music is at all chromatic, then you have to be really on top of things. But
Wow.
um, it's a strange effect to have to control the pitch with your feet,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And of course, organ, you use your feet too, but there's an actual keyboard down there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit more definitive,
Which this?
the organ.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say, but you still
Okay.
have to learn to coordinate that too.
Okay.
But yeah, that is the difficult thing about harp is the chromatics are in your feet. There are 7 pedals that control the accidentals.
Wow. So let me ask you this. Then why Ohio State? The Ohio State.
The Ohio State. It was, my wife and I had decided to start a family, and my family was all there. My siblings were in the central Ohio area still,
Yeah.
where we grew up, starting their own families. And
Mhm.
we thought, why not? And I ended up finding another bunch of wonderful teachers there.
Yeah. Yeah. But so after Ohio State, then you went back to Bowling Green to teach, or?
No, what happened was that after my master's, so I did not go straight through. After my
Okay.
master's, the year after that, they asked me to stay and fill a visiting assistant professor position for a whole year, while my thesis advisor did a sabbatical.
Okay.
And then they found, and then my computer music teacher, spent, I think, just 1 year at Bowling Green, and then went to Oberlin for the rest of his career.
Yeah.
And so they needed somebody to teach those classes, and he had taught me well. So I did.
Is that in the days of the Moog synthesizer?
Well, we had those, but no, we were feeding punch cards into an IBM mainframe.
Ah.
And then it would create a digital record of that, and we had to convert that to analog. All these things that happen on our phones just automatically.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was, pretty crude. But anyway, I did about 4 years of adjunct work, and then in my 6th year, I think it was, they had another visiting assistant professor position for me. And then one of the best things that anyone's ever done for me is to push me out of that nest.
Okay.
And it didn't hurt that their adjunct budget had been cut.
Yeah.
So I was on my own, and I got kicked out of the nest, but in the best possible way, and I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it at the time.
Yeah.
So I was the oldest in my doctoral class
Oh, okay.
by a few
Okay.
years, 5 or 6 years.
So and I'm assuming that you were full time as a doctoral student, or were you
Well,
doing other things?
it was, I don't, depends on what you call full time, but I had a halftime gig as a theory teacher, an oral skills teacher.
Yeah.
And I ended up taking 4 years to do that degree, because the third year, my professors were occupied because they were hosting a national composer convention
Mm.
in which Frank Zappa was the keynote speaker. And he gave his famous speech on titled "Bingo, There Goes Your Tenure." In other words, it was about the difference between our careers and his.
Yeah.
So we had a big national convention that lasted a week, and it was the planning for all that, and we all stayed an extra year because of that. But
Yeah.
but we got to participate in that.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you get from Ohio State to Wichita State? The Wichita State.
Well, the year I got my doctorate, I applied for this position, and unusually they were asking, this is David Childs, Walter Mays, and that
Yeah.
crowd, that
Yeah.
unusually they were asking for scores and recordings up front in the initial application.
Okay.
Not just the short list, but everybody.
For everybody.
And I was not even interviewed for the position, but 3 years later, when an emergency position came open, when Dr. Childs left to become the dean at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Walter remembered some of my harp music.
Mm-hmm.
And they had interviewed a couple of people, but then he remembered they wanted to go back into the pile, and he remembered that piece. And even though I'd been out of circulation for 3 years or so, they called me, and the rest is history. And now it turns out I was I was not only a good fit for Dr. Childs.
Yeah.
At the university, teaching similar kinds of classes, but I also replaced him in the downtown church I was talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Where
Okay.
he was organist and choir master there, and I was able to just fill in that part of the position, but that's not part of the position, but I was able to replace him in both of his positions.
Yeah.
Quite naturally. So I had heard of Wichita State from my professors at Ohio State, and they referred to it as the Conservatory on the Plains.
Yeah.
We were famous for that.
Which is an unusual aspect about Wichita State, the School of Music. Typically at a state institution like a Wichita State, the emphasis is usually on, say, music education. But one of the things that I found surprising when I got here was that there was much more of an emphasis on performing. Talk a little bit about that, the history in the School of Music and so forth.
Well, I can talk about how that affects me.
Okay.
Our professors here in the performance area are instrumental, are members of the Wichita Symphony, and therefore dedicated to being teacher performers.
Yeah.
And they tend to be of a higher skill level than the average state university might be. And this has served us well as composers, because if you ask if you can write a piece, or they ask us to write a piece for them, we're going to get a good performance. And the same is true of the ensembles. When I won the Ravelli Band Award, it didn't hurt that it was premiered at a convention of band directors, so most of the judges of that award had heard the piece live a few months before the contest. But I think what really got me that was the excellent performance of that band.
Okay.
And the same is true of orchestral and choral pieces that I've done.
Now, I think one of the advantages that we have at Wichita State is that we are in a metropolitan area. I don't think you could replicate that conservatory atmosphere in a much smaller community where you wouldn't be able to attract faculty to the local symphony quite as easily as here. Is that a fair statement to make?
That is a fair statement, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what gets you out of bed every morning? What really lights your fire, so to speak?
Oh, probably the fact that I've already been awake a couple hours thinking about what I'm going to say in class.
Yeah. So it's your classes that get you out of bed, huh?
Basically, it is. Yeah. Of course, we get a lot of time off as in the academic year, but when the semester is on, I'm fully engaged. And as I get older, it kind of gets worse. So maybe the best thing about retirement will be not lying awake having to think about that.
Okay. So on your best day, what are you doing?
Oh, reading or composing.
Okay. Talk a little bit about we've talked a little bit about technique. Do you have a technique to your composing? How much of it is inspiration? How much of it is perspiration? How much of it is process? How much of it is...
That's difficult to answer. There's some combination of all of those things that goes into it. Quite a bit of it is process. My music tends to be, although it's not serial, and it's less dissonant than the music than the ivory tower music that they used to make us write when I was in college.
Yeah. Webern was on the pedestal.
Yeah. I mean, at some point we couldn't even write diatonic scales or triads.
Yeah.
And that has changed, of course. But that being said, my music tends to be fairly structured in some senses. Walter Mays always jokes that you could miss a note in one of his pieces and it wouldn't matter, but it does matter if you miss a note in one of my pieces.
Oh, okay.
Because everything belongs where it belongs.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I'm going to push you in a corner a little bit.
All right.
You're a composer. You are in a school of music where everyone who is in your area, music theory, and this isn't always the case, but everyone is a composer. Walter Mays is a composer. Alex Sternfeld Dunn is a composer. Dave McDonald is a composer. And I know I've been here long enough to know that some of their predecessors were in theory comp were also composers. And I'm sure that professionally you have known and worked with other composers, either the people who taught you and so forth. So is there a typical process that composers go through? I mean, do you find that different people approach it differently, or, is there a... Is there a technique that is common to music composers?
I don't believe there is. I really don't. It's worth noting, though, that we are maintaining what is now a dying tradition of not separating the areas of theory and composition so much.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, though, I am more comfortable teaching theory than composition.
How so?
Well, I'm not even sure how I do it myself, so I haven't developed a lot of pedagogy for teaching someone how to do certain things. When I compose, I have these just little tiny sketches of things that eventually I figure out how to stick them together.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how to teach somebody to do that.
Because you're trying to teach them to be creative.
Correct.
Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. And when you teach theory, you're teaching them knowledge, basically.
Yeah.
Facts. And when you teach oral skills, you're teaching skills.
Skills. Yeah.
But not it's not creativity.
Yeah.
So much as just skills.
And it's probably easier to assess a level of competency or skill when you're doing something like that, rather than something where you're trying to measure how creative someone is being.
Mm-hmm. Now, the times I have taught composition, it's been pretty successful, and I've gotten good reviews.
Yeah.
And the students will give me credit for that later in their careers and so forth.
Yeah.
But I'd like for my teachers were all of the show me what you did this week type.
Yeah.
They didn't really give me specific exercises or things like this.
It was more of a critique level.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever talked to, well, all right, so here's the sordid underbelly, in my humble opinion. The sordid underbelly to, I'll say, the performing arts, because I would put this in with, say, theater, musical theater, dance, and so forth. People who are not musicians or who are not performers think we are teaching our students to be creative. We're not necessarily. If I'm an applied clarinetist, if I'm a professor and I'm teaching my students, I am not teaching them to be creative on the clarinet. I'm teaching them to most accurately replicate the creativity that somebody else has already generated. A Mahler symphony, I'm teaching them to play the clarinet piece in a Mahler symphony. Or if I'm a voice teacher, I'm teaching them the correct way to replicate a Mozart aria, an aria that has already been created by somebody else. And I don't have a responsibility as an applied teacher to take a student and teach them how to be creative on their instrument. Music theory even isn't necessarily teaching students creativity. It is teaching them the framework around which other people created. But now when you get into composition, and the same thing is true of people who teach dance or people who teach people to act. They're not teaching, in a way, acting is somewhat creative, but you're still having to do it within the parameter of somebody else's dialogue that they have composed or written. But when you get into composition, or let's say the visual arts, teaching someone to paint, you're not teaching them to paint by numbers, like so that they're replicating a Rembrandt or replicating even a Picasso. They have to find, quote unquote, their own voice. So how do you teach someone to find their own voice as a composer?
That is a difficult thing to teach. I think, though, that when we teach, as applied teachers do, as well as composers, and I think what we all try to do here in the School of Music is to go beyond technique and teach musicianship. And I think when you do that, you're on the borderline of teaching creativity.
Yeah.
But now the issue of a voice is, I think, self-discovery.
Yeah. How so?
Well, I don't think you can teach. I don't think you can tell somebody to develop a certain.
There isn't a correct fingering for an E major scale.
I don't think you can impose that on somebody else.
Yeah.
Although now I'm thinking that Nadia Boulanger did suggest to Aaron Copland that he needed to find a style that reflected the wide open spaces of America.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if she told him how to do that, or whether he discovered that on his own.
Yeah. But again, I think you're making the point. That was more of a critique, not a lesson in how to do, so to speak.
Well, one doesn't know, but she certainly did. That was her idea.
Yeah.
Of making that suggestion.
Yeah. Who was it? Pablo Casals, I think, that said the art to being a musician is playing a quarter note and it not being a quarter note.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There are lots of things that go into it.
Yeah. So along those lines, what's the wisest thing that anybody ever said to you about your music, your compositions, that really stuck in your mind and you've kind of used as a guiding North Star?
One person said once that what was distinctive about my voice has something to do with rhythm and meter. I also think it has something to do with harmony.
Mm-hmm.
I've also, the story I told about Walter Mays and how you can't change a note in one of my pieces as easily as in one of his. I think that says a lot.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I respect and admire his music.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah.
Okay. I recall when I was in New York City doing the world premiere of a piece and working with the composer. And it was, without naming names, it was one of those situations where, composers he was trying to make the music more complex and difficult than it really was. We had this one ensemble, for example, that was a series of alternating 5/8 and 7/8 meters. And we were all sitting there thinking, well, why didn't he just write the whole dang ensemble in 6/8?
I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because the exact same thing happened to me. I have a harp piece that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it actually goes da 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 da. So it's alternating between 7/8 and 5/8. And a reasonably famous Canadian composer once asked me, why didn't I write it all in 6/8? And the answer is that the concept of a downbeat has meaning to me.
In other words, your voice is rhythm and meter.
Well, part of it.
Okay.
Or at least in that, what is now earlier. I wrote a lot of harp music in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
But yes, I think there's a certain metric stress that the downbeat provides, and you want to bar the piece in a way that encourages that.
Okay. All right.
And I've discovered that even within that, you can syncopate and so forth. It's very interesting.
Mm.
I once wrote a piece for Vic Markovich. He always wanted me to write him a slow piece, and so I wrote a slow
The
piece.
former director of bands, by the way.
Excuse me, former director of bands.
Yeah.
And but it was all in 7/8
Mm-hmm.
and different kinds of 7/8. But the interesting thing was that I found all kinds of ways to have the 7/8 equivalent of a hemiola or a syncopation, or I just had a lot of fun discovering different metric things that I could do there.
So the essence of tonality is, it is sort of an oral language that even neophytes, people who don't know much about music, that there's this almost organic, visceral, dissonance going to resolution.
Mhm.
1 4 5 1. If you just played 1 4 5, then even people who don't know music would feel like it's unfinished. The phrase. How does your music relate in that sense? I mean, do you feel a need when you compose to have a resolution at the end, either a rhythmic or a tonal resolution? Or
Well, first of all, there are many ways of creating tension and resolution in music that
okay,
are not tonal.
yeah,
And a lot of all the elements of music work together to create the dramatic arc, and I think that's what you really need to attend to.
yeah,
So if the music gets more intense
hmm,
in the middle and is longing for a point of rest, that doesn't have to be a tonal event necessarily. It could be textural or
yeah,
rhythmic, or
hmm,
or go back to a more relaxed tempo or something like that. There are all kinds of ways to create tension.
hmm.
Uh, and that's what I teach in my theory classes. Maybe that's what I should teach composers. Uh, that in, since 1900, there have been many innovative things and ways of, some of them are quasi-tonal, but
Yeah.
uh, others are textural or rhythmic or formal, but it all comes down to that dramatic arc that is, I think, common to all performing arts, that you need to create this sense of that you've been somewhere and come back home.
All right. Well, I'm going to
And
push you in
literature,
another corner then.
for that matter.
So are you saying that a good music composition is telling a story?
Not necessarily literally,
Okay.
but the psychology of the piece. Um, there are certain kinds of dramatic arcs that work better than others. That's all I'm saying. But they don't have
Yeah.
to be connected to literally a story like program music.
No, no, no. But I guess what I'm saying by, and that was a wrong way to phrase it, that there is a overarching tension and release that has to be there in order for a piece to be considered
Yeah,
complete.
I think so.
Okay. All right. Um, is there a musical composition that you have pondered putting pen to paper to do, or and maybe in your case now, computer keyboard to software to? Is there a musical piece that you have not written that you've been pondering or wanting to write?
Well, yes. I've I've been struggling the last few years to write something for the oboe,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't found the right way to do it yet. So right now I'm looking at a string orchestra, harp, and oboe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I'm puzzling over currently.
Mm.
And we'll see where that goes.
So if you could have an unlimited amount of anything, what would it be?
Oh, I'd like to spend more time with my grandchildren.
Ah,
They
okay.
they all live far away from here, and I haven't seen them for quite a while.
And in the middle of this pandemic, that's
And nobody's
been a
going
real,
anywhere,
yeah,
right?
nobody's going anywhere. Where do they live?
I have two grandchildren in Lenexa, which we do see them a couple times a year, but haven't been there since Labor Day.
Yeah.
And the others live in the Bay Area in California,
Ah, okay.
and they're hunkered down and haven't been anywhere for almost a year.
California is not a great place to be right now in this pandemic, is it?
My son-in-law works at Google,
Ah, okay.
and so that's what took them there.
Okay.
It's even I, for this position, when the time came, I was willing to move my family 1,000 miles for a visiting position. I did win the permanent position, but there was no guarantee of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way things are right now in our lives.
Yeah.
That we would be willing to do that for our career. So we're all spread out.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions to try to stretch this a little bit. What is something that you would like to do, to learn to do, that you haven't learned at this point in your life?
I think that would be wood turning.
Wood turning?
Wood turning on a lathe. I've spent a lot of time surrounding myself with natural wood furniture, mostly antiques.
Yeah.
Mostly family pieces. And I always had a notion that I would like to turn bowls and things like that. It's all about the wood, really. And I have a cousin who did that for a living very well.
Yeah.
And I always kind of wanted to do that, but I don't know if I ever will take that up.
What kind of wood do you like? Do you prefer? Do you like the darker woods like walnut, or lighter woods like ash, or what?
Cherry. I have a collection of cutting boards, and the sycamore one is quite beautiful.
Yeah.
I have a lot of bowls that my cousin made out of hedge or Osage orange.
Osage orange.
Yeah, it's a very hard wood. There are zillions of those, the hedgerow trees. With the hedge apples.
Yeah.
It's a very dense wood, and it's kind of orange.
So let me ask this in another way. Tell me something that you like doing, but you're not very good at. I mean, you're so good at so many different things. You really are. Tell me something that you enjoy doing, but you're not very good at it.
Well, I'm going to say do-it-yourself home repair.
You have just classified yourself as the typical male.
I know. But part of the problem is that I want to get everything just right. so it takes me a while to put all those pieces together,
Yeah.
which is what makes me not very, actually, I am very good at it, and I'm just not very fast at
Yeah.
it. So if I really got paid by the hour, nobody could afford it.
All right. Well, let me ask the reverse of that. Tell me something that you do not like doing, but that you are good at, and anything.
Oh,
Some
I would say,
appropriate phrase.
I would say I'm a pretty good cook, and but cooking in a pandemic is something that wears you down after a while. We used to go out at least once a week,
Yeah.
and we haven't. I'm not ready to do that yet.
Yeah.
So it's not that I don't like to cook. It's just that there's no relief from it.
Yeah, you do it, and then dadgum, you do the dishes, and then you just have to turn
Yeah.
around and do it all over again. Yeah. So, we've talked a little bit about the pandemic, and obviously we're doing this conversation in the middle of this pandemic. What have you watched your students do that you've just absolutely amazed at? Talk about your students and their struggles in the middle of all of this. What are your thoughts and observations on that?
Oh,
And for that matter, your colleagues too.
yeah, it's hard to tell. I've been delivering my classes through this medium,
Yeah.
and I can deliver the content that I normally deliver.
Yeah.
But what I can't do is get a sense of whether it's sinking in or whether people are paying attention. And the worst thing about it is that the back and forth interplay between the teachers and the teacher and the students is minimized, let's say.
Yeah.
And that's part of the joy of teaching classroom courses is that interaction.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is missing to a large extent in this format. So my answer is I'm not getting a good sense of how they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Body language says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to get body language when it's from the neck down.
Well, assuming they have their camera on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can't ask them to turn it on because that's our policy here.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you like your obituary to say?
Oh gosh. I guess the usual things: devoted to family, inspirational teacher, wrote some good music, kind, gentle, thoughtful, spiritual. I think that about covers it.
Yeah. Good. So talk about the spiritual. I suspect we're not just talking about, religious dogma here. We're talking about, if you're a composer, there is a certain spirituality that you possess, right?
Sure. Just an inner life. Now, I was involved with an organized religion for many years.
Yeah.
And I take a lot from the ritualistic aspect of that. I think it's important to have these rituals that repeated. Even the rhythm of the liturgical year has some meaning to me, even though I don't believe some of the things literally in their creed,
Yeah.
I can believe them in my own way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Somebody recently told me that that I'm always playing three-dimensional chess, which
They accused you of that, or
whether I am or not, I took it as a compliment.
okay.
But I do have an active inner life that I guess most people would call spirituality.
Okay. And I think that comes through in your music, but how do you feed that spirituality?
How does it come through in my music that's not texted with religious text? Or is
Well,
that the music you're talking
there,
about?
yeah, there's well, it's hard to put my finger on, but all of the music all of your music that I have listened to, that I have heard, has a certain dimension to it, and maybe it's the rhythm and the meter and so forth, but of uh, of thoughtfulness
Hmm.
behind it. And maybe I'm equating thoughtfulness and spirituality in the same thing. Do you think they're the same thing, or do you think
Well,
they're different?
more or less the same thing,
Yeah,
I'd say.
yeah.
Uh,
So how do you
well,
feed your soul in that sense? What do you do? Do you go home and listen to Frank Zappa, or do you read Shakespeare, or what do you do?
uh, no, I mostly read nonfiction.
Ah, what do you you mean like historical novels, or historical nonfiction, or what?
Oh, I recently read Obama's new book
Mm-hmm.
that is really the first of two, I think, of memoirs of the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
I read his wife's book the year before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
things like that. The occasional novel.
Was there any one book in particular that you remember in your life having a standout, significant impact on you as you went forward?
Well, I have read a lot of books.
Mm.
Uh, there are too many that qualify that I find it
To
hard to think of
to
one.
think of just one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just the act of reading itself is probably somewhat
Maybe.
inspirational. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, um, what's the last thing that you did for the first time?
The last thing I did for the first time was just last month. I bought a grill,
Okay.
and it's one of those egg shaped grills that,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
and it's got
Ceramic.
yeah, ceramic, and it's the smallest, tiniest one that they have, but
Yeah.
it has a whole technique that goes along with it, and that's just what comes to mind as the last thing I did for the first time.
Okay.
I'm working with that. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. So
I know. Don't
here's my last question to you. We're in the middle of this pandemic, and people keep using the phrase "when we get back to normal."
Hmm.
My suspicion is that we never will get back to the normal that we were used to. And I may be wrong. Well, what do you see? What do you hope normal will be at some point in time in the future?
Well, I would hope that we can teach our classes in person
Mhm.
without limits on the capacity of the room and so forth.
Yeah.
I would hope that we could eat in restaurants because that's something I enjoy doing very much.
Mhm.
And I would hope that I could visit my relatives. My mom just turned 90 and I haven't seen her for over a year,
Yeah.
probably a year and a half.
Mm.
So if those things go back to normal, I'll be happy enough. But I'm not sure they will. We were just talking in a faculty meeting the other day that we would still have these restrictions on capacity even into fall of 22.
Mhm.
And I've heard other things on the news that we may never get back to normal in some ways.
Yeah.
What used to be normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I hope that's not true, but we will see.
Yeah. Dean, I can't tell you what a pleasure it's been to just sit and talk with you, to learn about you and what makes you tick and who you are and so forth. Any final thoughts, comments that you'd like to make?
The question you didn't ask,
Okay.
what was the last thing you did that gave you childlike joy?
Okay. There you go. What was that?
My answer is I have a little Mini Cooper that I just love to drive.
Oh,
I
okay.
just love to drive that thing. It's an older model, about 15 years old when they still had a supercharger. And that little thing is just a gas to drive. So I suppose this is the end of gasoline.
Yeah, but there's a problem with the Mini Cooper, at least in Wichita, Kansas. My understanding is in order to get it worked on, you have to go all the way to Kansas City. Is that right?
Oh, no, they have a dealer now.
Oh, they do have a dealer here now?
Over at Webb and 13th. It's Walzer, and they have lots of different BMW, Jaguar, you name it. They service all those cars.
Oh, okay.
And then Mini Cooper is one branch of it.
Okay. So now in order to publish this conversation, are we going to have to get a release sign from Walzer?
No, they'll appreciate the plug, I think.
The free plug, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dean, again, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. And I do hope that before too long, you'll be able to get in your Mini Cooper and drive your wife to the restaurant to have a meal before you come to Miller for a concert that includes some of your music.
Thank you.
All righty. Dean, thank you so much.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.